Imagine that you create a saturation between other people in their bodies and minds in the way how you have affected them through language and your appearance, and that this saturation reaches deep enough to become a kind of change in the way culture in general works, the same way how, for example, in the past, a certain ruler would have a kind of speech affectation, a difference in how they talk, and people would imitate that to recreate a sense of value of that for themselves and to be mimetic and signaling that as a kind of in group sign. How could we say? So the purpose would be then that saturative experiences have a without that is mind independent, and that if you can in some sense believe in being reincarnated again on the same timeline but downstream would imply that the karma from a previous life can benefit you in a life after in a way where it comes full circle even if you lost all your memory. In that sense, it's an impersonal kind of karma. It's a single karma that is unified in all of causality and in the unified field in a non dual way, in the same sense as how when you don't take your shopping trolley back, they don't necessarily think of it in a way that is like some, nitpicky person is moral about it. They probably have someone who works there who takes them back when they need to, and they accept this as a part of their job, as a part of their inherent an inherent part of the experience that isn't without dignity. Yeah. And so in this sense, I think that a lot of people get stuck on the point of dignity where they have an idealism about how life is supposed to be and how it's not supposed to be, and they project that onto others and onto themselves, and then life is full of friction. Whereas in reality, when you see the whole of all the different kinds of psychology you might encounter, you realize that it's a lot more open and not just forgiving. It forgets. It has bigger things it attends to, and in that sense, I don't think that punishment is really what it comes to. I think that the exact price of how things are is how things are, and as it is in each moment. In that sense, if you make a saturative stain on history, you suffer having to suffer, the saturative effects. And in that sense, it's only fair, and not really, how could we say, fair in a way where it's fair for each life, but it's fair to itself in the whole. And this kind of explains a lot more in terms of how then it's not that God is good or bad, it's that drugs and non drugs and porn and non porn are all part of God. It is the same bearer of all infernal and non infernal names as the one or the monad. And understanding then that being has all of these aspects as its own, we no longer ask is being good or is being bad. It is good when it is good, and it is bad when it is bad, and not necessarily so in a way that's the same for the same, since the one being eaten and the one eaten are having different feelings about the same experience. And so non duality is this fact of, both and as well the chance of not, that things go past and cease being possible. How history is a kind of hemming in that suffers the utmost fate of its particularity. In that sense, I wouldn't go with a religion that needs us to self blame ourselves, because, in the whole, yes, all blame is self blame, but it's also insourced and outsourced in such an ad hoc way that to prescribe a whole of how it has to be, can end up destroying what is to become of ecology in terms of making everything cancer, making everything the same cancer, and thinking then of where must energy come from in the abstract rather than this cycling around of the same in a game of gains and losses. Perhaps there is a beyond where, after all of our strifes in history, we reach a point of having an imminent abundance, something stable that can never run out, like a circle of happiness, forever meant to be as the culmination of, finitude in its own most end. Because finitude as it is isn't really dignified, like how evolution isn't really fair. Some things lose their eyes, other ones gain even more eyes and more potencies. It depends on the circumstance. In that sense, if we think about universal basic grace, it's that the body can adapt to hardship and it gets better over generations, and that the fate of ourselves are mixed with everyone else's, and that this makes all of the karma a lot lighter by us being, in some sense, in the space of our own grace as well, the space of our own forgetting, and having the room in that to rediscover ourselves and re-become as well, to suffer, how could we say, learning of repetition in the hard way. So it's only as good as we make it for ourselves, but that's not entirely true. There's a limit to how high you can build Babylon, given that the size is particular, and that energy behaves in these particular ways described by math, at least in the space we're in. These givens constrain what's possible, and in that sense, the surface area of choice is in each moment contracted to a new point, and we suffer having to, how could we say, pull it all forward. So yeah, what are you pulling forward? Them is my 3 cents. Thank you for bearing me.